Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our End of Life Care Doula Professional Certificate program. We have a full agenda today, and we have lots of folks we see still logging in, so thank you everyone for joining us today. We will have an opportunity. I'm monitoring the question box where we've been chatting a little bit this morning. I'm keeping an eye on that question box, so I will try my best to keep an eye out for your questions. We will have opportunities at the end to answer questions that maybe have not been answered throughout the presentation. And in all circumstances, you can always send us an email as well if you have follow-up questions or something we didn't answer today. So let's get to it. We have a full agenda today. We'll do quick introductions. I have the pleasure of having our program director, Francesca, with us today. We're going to go over what is an end-of-life doula. It's a really interesting field of work, and so we'll really dive a little bit into what is an end-of-life doula and what is end-of-life care. What is our certificate program? So how do you learn to become an end-of-life doula? The objectives of the course and the outcomes, the intended outcomes of the course, and what is an online course, and what is the expectation of time and the modules and the structure, so that we can guide you through that process as well. And we'll also hear a few testimonials and comments from students. We have put hundreds of students through this program over the last couple of years, and so their perspective on the rewarding nature of this work is really interesting. And then we'll go through some of those logistic questions so that you can hopefully get registered for our next session, which starts in January. And of course, there's always the top questions that get asked, so we'll go over those in case those haven't been covered today. My name is Nicole DeWillier-Fenton. I have the pleasure of working in our continuing and distance education department, running our content marketing. And I have the pleasure of having Francesca with us today. Francesca has been a longtime doula, working on both spectrums of life, and we'll learn a little bit about her experience as well. She was a graduate from UVM also, so she's pretty comfortable here on this campus. Still no parking here. Still challenges of parking, but we love UVM and are so thankful to have this program and Francesca back with us to launch this program several years ago, and continue the good work here today. And also, one of the books that is part of the curriculum is Francesca's book, Cultivating the Doula Heart, The Essentials of Compassionate Care. We'll learn a lot more about what that means by compassionate care at the end of life as well. And as I mentioned, she has been a doula on both ends of the spectrum for many, many years. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to dive in. But I think one of the things that's really outstanding, and I love this slide too, because this was somewhat of your idea and your concept, because you were doing some of this work and seeing a need for this work. But over the years, it has grown to be this amazing group of people that are supporting this kind of work, because, and many of the faces that we see there are former students, and they have seen the value in this work and want to continue to spread it. So let's talk about that for just a minute. What has been kind of the progression of the course, in terms of starting with a concept and then where we are today? It has grown beyond even what you envisioned. Is that
Oh,
true?
definitely.
Yeah.
So originally, Cabot Cooperative approached UVM with this idea and asked, would you be willing and able to create an end-of-life doula training program? And so I have a connection at UVM with a program director, and we had already been discussing doula-related topics. And so he asked me, would I be interested in looking into end of life versus beginning of life, which is what we had been discussing. And I said, yes, definitely. Because in my personal experience, I had been with a number of family members during their time of dying and realized how similar that realm felt to beginning of life. Not in terms of outcome, of course, and some of the emotions are different, but in terms of holding space during such mystery and such intensity.
Yeah.
And so then I took a year to do research of my own, training of my own, and working with a number of local and also remote experts in the fields of palliative care and hospice and in the doula world to create this curriculum.
And we also work, we see Dr. Gramling is there too. This is also, and I think this is a really important aspect that is unique to this program too. It is connected with Robert Larner School of Medicine. And so how does that kind of infiltrate and work with the program as well, that perspective?
We've had support from Dr. Gramling, who is our Chief of Palliative Care at the University of Vermont Medical Center, from its inception, which is invaluable. So we feature his expertise throughout the course, He covers a number of topics, including beginner's mind, which is a Buddhist perspective, and also turning towards suffering. We discuss suffering with him quite a bit because that is the goal of palliative care, is to address suffering. We also are able to show a mock scenario video from the med school, which they have shared with us, which many of our learners say is a highlight of the course, to be able to see that practice. And we are also working with him, we're very excited, on a demonstration project. So I'm able to be a doula on his team, and we're looking into a bereavement intervention for the next 3 years.
Oh, that's so great. So really this work is just really expanding and the opportunities to continue to learn for you as well.
Definitely.
Which is really cool. So wanted to just move on here for just a second. I thought it was just a really interesting point too, that how much this program has grown, because a few years ago we probably wouldn't have as many people on that slide. So it really is a great indication of the interest, I think, in this work. So let's take a step back for a second. And so what is an end-of-life doula? I'm sure you get asked this quite a bit, and many people who are probably joining us today trying to understand what is that and what does that mean. So tell us, what is an end-of-life doula?
An end-of-life doula is a non-medical emotional support person. So someone who could be hired privately, if it's the case of a private practice doula, by a client who perhaps has received a terminal diagnosis and knows that time is short. And the doula would then assist that client and that client's loved ones with planning and processing and preparing for end of life in a number of ways.
And there's so many different aspects as to what that means. Can you walk us through a few, and when we have a few examples, I think up here on the slide as well, that coordination of care, thinking of vigil planning, legacy planning, what are some of the normal kind of steps that a doula would work on with a family and a client?
So first it would be building rapport and trust. It would be discussing the life of the client and the values and wishes and preferences of that client. So for some doulas and for some clients, they will focus on life review, which could be formal or informal. It could be conversation, or it could be something that is, has a number of prompts and is recorded even on paper or on
visual.
video. And so that becomes a legacy project of sorts, and also other legacy projects like a scrapbook or a family cookbook, something artistic or creative. It really depends on the client's interests. And so that's an important process for the client in terms of processing their life. And then also it could be a lasting gift for loved ones. And then there's the advanced care planning. So assessing, what do you have in place? Do you have legal forms? Do you have your advanced directives? Have you chosen a proxy, a medical surrogate decision maker, or not? And how can I assist with that? And then the rest of it, sort of filling it out more comprehensively. Who are you as a person? What are your spiritual or religious needs at that time? What would you like in terms of the atmosphere? Who do you want surrounding you? How do you want it to sound, look, feel? All of those details to make it most meaningful and most personalized.
And so I do see a few questions. I just want to jump in here and make sure that we're making sure. Okay, it looks like we're having a little bit of sound, but hopefully we're okay. Looks like there's a few people that are saying it's okay. So hopefully everything's okay for everybody sound-wise. I think one of the really important points that you have made several times, and I think you're very mindful of saying client versus patient. And so one of the things that I think is really important, it's really a complement to the other services that are happening. Can you unpack that a little bit and tell us about that?
Sure. So whether it's beginning of life or end of life, a doula comes in, and I talk about doulas as being chameleons. So we are not taking center stage. We are thoughtfully, calmly, quietly entering in respectfully and seeing what's already in place, seeing what's there, who is there in terms of the natural network, and then in terms of medical care, whether it's palliative or hospice. Where are they located? What else might they need from the doula, and maybe outside resources as well? We talk about care coordination. So our doulas throughout the course are building a local resource directory in order to be able to share with their clients. So we don't step on toes, we don't duplicate care. We're seeing what else is needed and what could be beneficial and supportive. We're also looking to see how we can plug in the loved ones and the natural network of each client. What are their strengths? What are their interests? How involved would they like to be?
Interesting. Really wonderful work. And I'm just so thankful that we're able to do this here through the University of Vermont. So, one of the things that I think is really important is to think about, well, how do you learn to do this? And I think many people, and we've talked a little bit too previously, that who is the type of person that is drawn to this kind of work? And they tend to be already compassionate. They tend to be, I think you've said to me before, they tend to be a type of person that often people turn to and look to for advice or for comfort. Um, we also see a lot of people in the healthcare industry that maybe need some other tools in the toolbox to be able to process some of this themselves and or help family members process this. Can you talk a little bit about the types of people that are drawn to this work?
That has been one of the most fascinating surprises in the course. When we first launched and I had developed the curriculum, I had assumed we would attract mostly people interested in becoming a private practice doula. And I quickly learned that we have a much broader audience than that, which is fabulous. So I reworked the curriculum, and now we have 8 modules that are applicable to all human beings in all types of work, and then 1 bonus module that focuses on the career pathway of a private practice doula, so that we can cater to this variety of goals for the course that people bring. So we have medical people, we have spiritual care providers, we have mental health therapists, we have hospice volunteers, we have people who in their own lives are supporting someone through end of life or who anticipate doing so and they want some more tools. So what we'd like to provide is a really comprehensive overview of hospice and palliative care so that our doulas fully understand the realm. What are you going to be walking into? We need for people to feel well prepared and well versed in all of the roles associated with those medical care teams, which involve more than just medical care, of course. And so our topics, we'll go through our topics soon. But
we
really
can jump into
cover
those. Yeah, we can certainly jump into those. Yeah. And I think that, I think the topics will lead well into some of these intended outcomes. And I've, there's a lot here. And so it's a little overwhelming. And I think the slide, I really debated about, do we want to put all this in these slides? But I think that it really demonstrates the breadth of learning, the opportunity for growth, and really the details in terms of the path that somebody goes through in this program. You work on yourself a little bit, you work on your understanding of how to work with other people, and then what are the things that you can walk away with. And so do you want to maybe touch on some of these? I've kind of highlighted work in harmony with our clients team. We've talked a little bit about that, respecting appropriate boundaries. Maybe just talk us through, and this connects back to the curriculum, what are some of the things that somebody will walk out of this program feeling equipped to do?
Sure. As you mentioned, it's a blend of introspective work and then also being able to support other people. So I really feel strongly that we have to look inward first. We have to work on our own baggage, our own wounds, our own grief that we carry, our own preferences, and our own hopes, and get really clear on our stuff. And then we're able to enter into somebody else's space without an agenda, without judgment, which is hugely important. So that's what we walk away with, is engaging in deep introspective work about our own end of life, and then preparation, tools, techniques, approaches that we can use with clients and also, I'll say, patients. So people who are working in the medical care field, nurses, aides, doctors who we've seen come through, they're able to add to their tool bags and what they're already offering. We also have people who come through who have found themselves quite burnt out in their work, which we know fatigue is an issue in this type of caregiving. And so a couple of offerings ago, we had a hospice nurse of 3 decades who came through.
Wow.
And
you would think she already knows this.
Exactly. I was wondering what we could possibly offer her. And
really
she
great.
had so much to offer us in our discussion boards. It was incredibly rich. And she said at the end of it that she had healed her hospice heart,
Oh my goodness, I bet that
which
was
was
it right there for you.
beautiful.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And I think that's a great lead in as well. And I do see some questions coming in. Let's just pause for a moment and see what associations are we able to join after completing the UVM certification. And so that's a really interesting question. We'll unpack that a little bit more. That's Mike. We'll talk a little bit more about the post work potentially afterwards in just a bit. So I want to just jump into what is the course structure? Because Francesca just mentioned discussion boards. And so we get this question a lot in terms of, I've never taken an online course. How could I possibly learn this deep, compassionate work online? And I think that's something really interesting because we've been doing it now and hundreds of people have been able to do this and find that this opportunity is indeed incredibly rewarding and you're able to connect. What is the answer to that question that you get? How can I build on and learn these compassionate skills online?
It's really within our discussion boards, and we have prompts that are very thought provoking, and activities and assignments and projects that we do throughout the 8 weeks. And then we bring back our reflections and share them. And that's where some of the most engaging learning happens. And then those connections we're building so that by the end of the course, we often have grief that we're holding. And we have a goodbye board.
Yeah.
And it's very emotional for people to be able to say, thank you and goodbye, which is a beautiful practice because that's what our clients are going to be doing on a larger scale, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've heard from many students that didn't want it to end. And so that's very reflective of what I think happens in end of life care as well. So I'm just going to jump back super duper quick. I advanced that a little too quickly. So the program runs essentially the course, the next module, the next week's lessons open up on a Wednesday, and there'll be various different prompts for assignments. And I would imagine there might be assignment due on Sunday and then on Tuesday. Walk us through what a week looks like in our end of life care doula program.
Sure. So mods open Wednesday morning, and then you have time for the next week or 6 days to be able to work through that content. We have our first due date is usually always Sunday night. So that's a discussion board prompt, and it's generally asking you to reflect on either a reading or a video we've watched or your own personal experiences. And if you're not comfortable with that, then you can choose an example from the book. We give lots of options to meet people where they are. And then from Sunday to Tuesday, people are completing their directory list, which they're looking for experts in their local area that are related to the topic of that week. And they're also taking generally a quiz about the content, and then they're finishing one more discussion board post and then responding to their classmates' posts from Sunday.
Right.
A lot of interactivity during those last couple of days.
Yeah,
of each
absolutely.
module.
So it gives you plenty of time. And one of the things that's really important is that and we get this question a lot too, it is not live. It's not live sessions. You don't need to log in at a certain time to have Francesca share a lecture with you. There are recordings, there are readings. As she said, when the class opens, that session opens on Wednesday morning, all of the discussion opportunities and readings and videos and lectures are listed so that you could finish it all in one day. You can spread it out over the week. You could finish it on the weekend. So it really gives you the ultimate flexibility to be able to say, okay, what do I need to do this week? And what does my week look like? Because I would imagine many, if not all of our students are probably working full time.
Or we have a lot of retirees as well, which is lovely. So people get their work in at all different times, and we have people from across the world.
Yep,
so
sure do.
time zones.
Exactly. So
they
time
vary.
zones are a factor,
Yep.
absolutely. And also what's I think really important is that the time frame that people can expect for that week. And sometimes I would imagine it varies a little bit. There might be a little bit heavier reading on one week and a little bit lighter on the next. But for the most part, what would you say is what somebody should expect to spend each week?
We're hearing from our learners that on average it's anywhere from 8 to 12 hours per week. And what we do is at the end of each module, we offer a section of for further learning links, which will never be part of an assignment or be featured on a quiz, but we feel like are relevant and interesting enough that we want to include them in the course. So for some people, they have the time to move through all of that content. And for other people, they will pick and choose and save.
Or bookmark it,
exactly,
and save it for later because it's something interesting that they want to look at. Let's we have a couple questions here, so it'd be a good time to pause here for a second to say, Oh, interesting. Yeah. David asks, has there ever been offered in person at UVM? We've done some kind of supplementary workshops with
Mhm.
you that were offered. There was a little bit, there was a small group in person, and then we streamed it as well, available through this type of platform too. So, have we had any other opportunities like
And
that?
last fall, we had a gathering
Oh, good.
for
Yep.
graduates, and we're thinking about maybe next fall, so maybe a biannual
Right.
gathering of grads, because we have quite a few graduates that would like to get together in person
I
and
bet.
have more of a conference, more opportunities for practicing and collaborating and networking.
I bet.
Mhm.
And we had a lovely discussion this past summer as well. We had a panel discussion with Kimberly Paul, who's also really advocating for this kind of work. She's driving her RV across the country, wanting to change the conversation around dying. And so we had a really interesting panel that was also available via our web streaming and in person. So we're constantly looking, I think, for these opportunities to continue these conversations, not just online, but also in person or both, maybe.
And I'm seeing a number of our graduates who are creating and launching events of their own
Great.
in other areas. So next week I'll be in Arizona with one of our graduates who is
Yeah.
holding a Before I Die event in
Yes.
Scottsdale.
And we have a really active End of Life Doula Facebook page.
Mhm.
And so that group, maybe just talk about what happens on that page and kinds of conversations and articles. And
Sure. Lots of sharing of articles and videos and asking questions. So we recently had someone who said, "Do you charge a speaking fee?"
Yeah,
And a number of people responding about
yeah,
what they would charge and how they would charge for that, or if they do or don't. People who are asking for help on their website. How does it look? Could I get feedback on it? I'm
oh,
just
great.
thinking about
Yeah,
opening it up to the public, or hospices that are going to integrate a volunteer group of doulas in an
oh,
area.
yeah.
We also get people who say, I know of a potential client in this certain state and town.
Is
Is
anyone
there
there? Yeah,
exactly quite a bit
real
happening?
collaboration. That's so wonderful to see. And I think that's just a more demonstration of what really happens, I think, in the course and what you've really built. So let's just answer a couple more questions too. We have Robert asking, can you catch up the following week if you miss a weekly assignment?
Yes,
Sort
if
of.
if there is a
Yeah,
strong reason
yeah,
for needing to do that, we
yeah.
do understand that life happens. We really strongly encourage learners to stay up with the content because it's really that interactivity within the
Yeah.
boards. And if you're
It's
missing that, we're
relevant to what,
moving
yeah,
through it together,
right.
even though it's asynchronous. So once somebody gets behind, it can be really difficult to catch back up.
Yeah. So I have found that too. I've taken several online courses, and sometimes it's tough to make it as life gets in the way. But
Mhm.
um,
So
you
then
know,
we talk about prioritizing
yeah,
your efforts, and we will support people through times like that.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So we have another question. How does one transition from volunteer work to being paid? Some may not see a point in paying doulas when they have volunteers. And there is no tacky question. Thank you for saying that, Christina. But and I bet you get this a lot
Sure.
too, is to, in terms of people are thinking, can I turn this into a career?
Mhm.
So how have you seen that successfully, or what advice would you give from transitioning from volunteer to a paid position?
Sure. We do know that quite a few of our doulas who don't think that they have enough experience to hang a shingle after the course will look to hospice for
Yeah,
volunteering. That's their way of having some hands on experience before they feel confident and comfortable enough to work as a private practice doula. So it's a wonderful pathway and option for people. There is a need out there
yeah,
for more, and there will be an increasing need
right,
as we're aging.
right.
So, what it takes though is some determination
Hmm.
and grit because this is an emerging field. So, you're going to need to do marketing, you're going to need to do networking,
Hmm.
public speaking, sharing what is a doula
Right,
and what can
right.
I offer,
Yep.
working alongside hospices and palliative care teams, and then word of mouth will start to build and that momentum. And then you'll see more calls and referrals.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And I think you make the point too that this is an emerging field.
Mhm.
Why do you think, and somewhat of it is rather obvious, I would imagine there are baby boomers are a very large population,
Mhm.
and they're aging, and we're all aging, of course. But why do you think now, perhaps, that this type of work is so relevant?
I think it's because of the boomers. And we saw in the 70s the shift in our culture about childbirth and
Mhm.
making sure that there was space for natural childbirth
Yep.
and for more personalized care and more options, more informed decision making during that natural life occurrence. And the same goes for end of life. And boomers are they're putting their feet down and they're saying, I want a voice in this. I want to say. And doulas will support that.
That's so great. Thank you for that too. A couple other questions coming in. What sets UVM certificate program apart from other end-of-life doula training programs, such as given by organizations as doula givers or the INELDA, I think it is. I know that's an acronym, but what would you say? I would absolutely. One differentiator is the fact that we're connected to the Lerner College of Medicine. What else? I bet you get that question a lot too. What
I
else?
do.
Yeah.
We have a number of subject matter experts from a number of roles in the field, which is lovely. We are an 8-week program, and so many other programs, there are some other training organizations that offer a certification pathway, and often they're either a 3-day in-person intensive plus additional work that you hand in over the next couple of years, and then that could lead you toward a certification. On average, our learners spend about 80 to 100 hours on their coursework, so that's one way that we're differentiating in terms of the workload. We have quite a few learners, though, that have gone through other training programs and then come through ours or vice versa, and so we highly encourage that. I mean, the
more, the better.
exactly,
Probably,
and people tend to really enjoy that. I would also really encourage people to ask on Facebook, go into our group or other groups for doulas and ask for people's perspectives on their training programs so that you get a better feel, because I certainly haven't participated in all of them, but I know that all of the trainers are incredibly passionate about this work.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen a lot of examples of people that just are setting great examples of being people who are advocating for this work and then trying to train more people because they feel so passionate about the opportunity that we need to change the conversation about dying.
And what we've noticed from our program, which is wonderful, is that it's really word of mouth. We haven't had to do much advertising because our graduates tell everyone they know about their experience coming through the program, and then we get more people coming through, and which is lovely.
It is great. Back to, I'll take a pause from the questions for just a minute, just to go back to some of the learning. So we call them modules, or you could think of them as weeks. So as Francesca said, it's an 8-week program. And so I think we've touched on this throughout our conversation, but the slide shows the different topics for each of the different weeks and the modules. Do you want to just kind of give us a quick overview of kind of the flow of, we've talked about a little bit, but maybe summarize kind of the flow of information that we go through in those 8 weeks?
Sure, sort of highlighting.
Sure, yeah.
So the introduction is really talking about palliative care, hospice care, the roles, and then doula work, the tenets of doula care. Then, and we hear some stories initially to kind of warm us up to a more personalized view of end of life. Then the grief continuum we cover twice because it's such an important aspect. And we talk about the anticipatory grief or preparatory, or I call it progressionary grief in the Doula Heart book. So that's in module 2. And then in mod 3, we talk about the patient experience, which, as you clarified, as doulas, the recommendation is to call the people we serve clients because we are non-medical. And still, we want for our doulas to understand, as people receive a terminal diagnosis, they become a patient. And what is that like? What does that entail? And what are some of the conversations? And how could those conversations go well? How can we empower people to get their questions answered? So that's sort of what we cover in mod 3. And then mod 4, we go into professional boundaries, which is really gray and sticky and tricky. And we go through a lot of scenarios in the discussion boards. And we also go into sort of the heart of the work, so the doula essentials of care in mod 4 and mod 5. So that's about serving and companioning and what is compassion and unconditional positive regard. We talk about suffering and how to attend to suffering. We talk about our shadow sides and our shadow selves and how to serve well. Those are some of my favorite weeks. And then we go into mod 6, which covers religious and cultural beliefs and practices. We talk about cultural humility, and that is a really important stance in our work. And then mod 7, we go back to grief, and we talk about the actual loss and then mourning and bereavement. We talk about pediatric death as well in that module. And then mod 8 is sort of grounding us. It's talking about more comfort measures for care. We have a number of videos from this wonderful nurse who's one of our subject matter experts who teaches healing touch. And we talk about the doula scope and role again to kind of leave
Bring
us
it back
feeling
around.
centered.
Yeah. And then, as Francesca mentioned too, there's some other materials that we kind of call the bonus module that may be a little bit more geared towards if you are thinking of pursuing this or changing careers. What are some tips and tools to be able to do that? So let's jump back into some of the questions. We have a great question from Julia. Um, I love this question, and I bet you get this too. What is a day in a life of an end-of-life doula like?
I mean, it would depend. So I would say more of what is a visit like
Right. Yeah.
potentially. It's really about going in. Maybe you have an idea of where you left things off during your last visit and what the hopes are and goals are for this visit, and then entering in and just assessing, meeting the moment where it is,
Right.
seeing how your client is doing on that day,
Right.
and then considering, does it still make sense for us to finish that recorded life interview? Maybe one of the loved ones is having a really difficult time and is feeling really overwhelmed. So the focus might actually shift to going for a walk with that loved one, giving the client a little bit of calm and quiet, and going for a walk just to be a listening ear, or perhaps to open up conversation if that person's comfortable, or just to walk in silence and just be there for that person. So it's about being a chameleon again. It's about
Yes.
shape shifting.
I like that. That is a really smart way to think about it because I think that, and so many times, I'm sure several of our folks participating today have worked in healthcare, and you do have to be a chameleon because you don't know what's coming at you
Right.
so much of the time. Yep,
Flexibility is key.
absolutely, it is. We have a few more questions here, and I just wanted to zip back up. I'm losing track of some of them. Uh, oh, Yarrow says, I'm already enrolled, just started, and love this program so much. Feel very lucky to be a part of it. I'd like to add to the discussion that I also find it really spiritually rewarding. Not yet sure what kind of end of life support I want to offer, but this training feels really incredible, valuable for myself, my family, and my own spiritual development. Thank you so much. That's really wonderful. Oh, this is interesting. I'm wondering if there will be templates or wording for client contracts offered in the bonus module.
We give suggestions
Mm-hmm.
and points to cover in the contract. We don't actually hand over an actual contract to people, but we give pointers for what you could include in that, as well as considerations like insurance coverage and types of businesses and resources for opening up a small business.
Great, thank you. And I do see some other questions coming in. And Jacqueline, thank you so much for jumping in and answering some of these. I saw Karen asked about scholarships, and Jacqueline also gave a suggestion. Jacqueline's on our team. She gave a suggestion as to where to potentially go with that as well. So let's, oh, I think we're being asked to zip up for some questions. Let's see. I just want to see, make sure we didn't. Trish's question, how do you not step on hospice's toes? Great question.
With thoughtfulness and grace.
Right, I was gonna say sometimes you probably do, but
Right. I mean, it's the same that goes in the birth field, goes in end of life. There are care providers who are there who have expertise that we value and honor and respect, and we do not make medical decisions. We do not make medical suggestions. We sometimes will create opportunity for those discussions to happen, or we might say, "What have you considered asking about something?" But it's our approach that enables us to remain harmonious and complementary.
Great. And Yarrow had offered his perspective, her perspective, excuse me, on how it's going and what it feels like to be in the course. And you'll see, I won't read these quotes verbatim, but this is kind of the theme that we see from a lot of our students, that there was just curious about grief. You know, how do I better support people grieving? How do I unpack and deal with my own grief? And I think one of the things that I felt it made such a point that you said to me a few weeks ago when we were talking about this, that this is inevitable, right? And so we don't talk about dying and the grief and the process much as society. And that's a problem. But I think it's also really rewarding to see that there are this many people coming through our programs and interested in our program that want to change the way that we approach and talk about death. Mm-hmm. Has that been your perspective as well?
Oh, definitely. I'm continuously surprised that people show up for this, that people sign up for this, that people are interested in this webinar. It's really comforting to see this shift culturally.
So I'm just going to take a quick look. I think we've pretty good on our questions. Oh, Heidi asks, is there a possibility that Medicare hospice benefit will ever cover the cost for end-of-life doula in the future? That's a hard one to know.
It's possible. There are doulas and organizations that are doing research, so they're trying to track the benefits of doula care in order to consider that pathway. So birth doulas have been around for quite a bit longer, and there have been some states that have passed Medicaid coverage of doula services. So there's potential there, but there are also people who feel like private practice doulas who do not want to enter into that realm and who want to practice privately because they don't want the documentation. They want to be able to practice the way that they would like to practice outside of the hospice sphere.
Okay. I think this is this is a graphic that you provided to me, and I love this because one, you talk so much about the doula heart, um, and I think this just really focuses and encapsulates all the different things that you're hoping, that folks will walk out of this course with and feel equipped. Just tell me a little bit about that.
And this is why the course, I feel like, is applicable to human beings.
Yeah.
Because we can infuse these into our relationships, our marriages, our parenting, our friendships, our work. It's all applicable and relevant. And so I feel like no matter what the goal is coming in, being able to take away some of this into life is beneficial.
We have another question, and I bet this happens probably a lot for you too, is would the end-of-life doula take place of a hospice volunteer?
No, not necessarily. The end of life doula would provide an additional layer of support. So if that client is already has regular visits from a hospice volunteer, lovely. If the family feels like there are more opportunities there, then more times for respite or more focused goals about vigil planning or perhaps legacy projects or life review, then a doula would be invited to come in on the days that a volunteer is not available.
Do you ever see circumstances where they work together?
Meaning?
Meaning a hospice volunteer and a doula side by side?
It's possible. I mean, I would encourage families to sort of spread out their care because caregiving is so incredibly exhausting that being able to have that kind of extra hand and coverage is invaluable. I myself am a hospice volunteer as a doula because that's what I can sort of manage alongside the responsibilities of the course. So I'm able to go sit with I have a client currently who's in the community and I visit weekly with that person.
It's interesting that kind of the opportunities to kind of weave in and out to gain additional experience and to just be able to share what you've learned and your compassion in a variety of different ways.
And what we see and what I think we'll see more of in years to come is that adult children who are in charge of their parents' care are living remotely. They're not necessarily in the same town or on the same street anymore. And so they want to coordinate and arrange for care to be going in regularly. And a lot of elders are wanting to age in place.
Right. Absolutely.
They want to stay home, but doulas can also go into facilities and visit with people there as well.
Okay, so we have a couple more quick questions. Do any of your students work in parish-based programs?
For pay, I assume they're asking?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
We have a number of people who come through that work in the spiritual care realm, and whether they are chaplains or ministers and their goals for following, after the course, they really vary. I'm not sure about doulas who have been hired by religious orgs.
And that's a great segue into Noreen has a question. Does the course look at other cultures and how they deal with death and dying?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And that's part of Mod 6, which is really fascinating.
I bet it is, especially given I feel like in the United States, we haven't necessarily always taken care of our elder as well as we should. And other cultures, I think, are a really interesting example of how it could be done.
Yes, and we have new innovations that are coming up all the time, which is really exciting. So we're always reworking the curriculum and adding when we see, the composting is now available in some of our country, and those options for people,
Fascinating.
keeping it updated.
There's another question here that says, as a doula, do you arrange those caregivers for the client?
I assume they're referring to hospice or palliative
Yeah.
care. We wouldn't be in charge of arranging hospice or palliative care. We would certainly attempt to create the bridges to care.
Mhm.
And I think there's an opportunity for a doula to perhaps be hired before hospice and palliative care are in the picture.
Mm.
And then we could encourage them to consider those types of services maybe even sooner,
Mm.
as they're really beneficial. And we don't see, especially locally here in Vermont, we see people waiting until time is really short, and sometimes waiting until a crisis
Yeah, I bet.
to be able to accept hospice. So we consider ourselves a bridge to that kind of care. But what a doula could offer is sort of the overall calendar and schedule for people, which can be really burdensome for loved ones. So we could look at, when are your hospice appointments? And then how much energy do you have? And when do you have that kind of energy? So if we're thinking about visitors, when could we schedule them in for, and for how long? So the client is leading that discussion, but we could do some of the organization.
Yeah, and I bet that would be incredibly beneficial. Um, so I do have a couple questions that are coming in about the next start date of the course. So this will be a good time to jump into some of this information here. So you'll see the pricing here is $800 for the 8-week program. There is a deposit of $500 due at the time of you register. Our next one starts January 15th. And I would highly recommend, if you are interested in taking the next session, that you register as soon as possible, because we have filled and end up having a waiting list for this course every single time. And so if it's something that you're interested in and you think that the January start time might be a good fit for you, I would highly encourage that you do that. And as I mentioned, there is a wait list oftentimes. So if it does fill, we do then have a wait list. And then if there's opportunities and spots open up, we go back out to that wait list and let folks jump in there as soon as they can. I think it's important to do a quick note about the orientation. There's an optional orientation that starts. You can do it or not, hence optional. But what is the orientation? And have you found that that's really beneficial for folks?
Sure, we have people who have never completed an online course,
Right.
and we fully welcome you
Yeah.
to our community. We have a 1-week orientation program that opens up 1 week before the actual start date of the course, and it allows people access into Blackboard, which is our
Yep.
home for
Yep.
the course.
Yep.
And so that you can figure out how to navigate it, how to find things, how to post on the discussion boards, how to enter a journal entry, all of those things you can practice ahead of time. So it helps give people more confidence going into the course.
Absolutely. And so I'm just going to see if there's any other quick questions that are coming in. Registration, I believe registration, if it's not open yet for the, yeah, it's not open. I'm getting Kelly's nodding to me. No, it's not open yet for the January session. But you can put your name onto our inquiry, our email list, and so that you will be notified when it does register. It should open very soon. And then what constitutes a full class? How many participants are in each class? Great question. We have increased the capacity of the class. We are now, the session just started yesterday. Our October session just started yesterday, and we have a capacity of 200 students. And this is offered 5 times a year. And so it's really exciting that there's that many students that we could be potentially teaching this incredible care.
And we have sections of 25 students. So your
Right.
particular section will be 25, you plus 24 other people. So it creates a more cozy community for more sharing within those small groups.
Right. It would be a little difficult, I think, to chat with 200
Right.
people. Thank you for answering that. That's a really great point. And yes, thank you. The orientation is complimentary. So we've touched on most of these questions. I just wanted to double check that if there isn't something we haven't answered, because these are the questions that we get asked most often about this course. We've talked about a typical week. We've looked at the different modules, hours in between 8 and 10, 8 to 12 each week. Interacting with the instructor and the other students. I think that's a really good point too. There's opportunity to, in fact, it's part of your assignments to interact with the other students in your smaller groups at your 25 group. on a weekly basis, but also interacting with you. At what point,
Mhm.
and when we have academic coaches, on that first slide that we showed so many incredible faces that are participating in terms of instruction and helping support of this course. Tell me about how you engage sometimes with folks in this course and the role of the academic coaches as well.
Sure. So we've hired 5 of our graduates
Mhm.
who are now academic coaches. So they're supporting learners through their 8 weeks, and they are managing a lot of the discussions within the course. I manage the open discussion boards, and I also respond to journal entries. And that's a private exchange between just me and the learner. So if there's something that's a little bit more sensitive that you don't feel like sharing with the group, then we can have that communication within the journals, and also, of course, over email as well. And the coaches are really very involved.
Yeah, I bet they're super excited to be
They
involved and be able
are.
to share this. We've talked a lot about how online courses work and what will you receive. This was back to, I think, one of the questions that maybe Mike asked in the beginning. What will I receive at the completion of this course? So there is a certification. Yeah, you want to talk about it?
Sure, you will receive a professional certificate. And so we hesitate to call it a certification program.
Mhm.
And that's because right now, as of right now, which is still the case for birth doulas 30 years later, there's no licensure, there's
Right.
no overseeing credentialing body. There are individual training organizations that provide a course for their students. So we provide this professional certificate program.
Are there, or I know that question came up earlier, are there organizations that people can join as a result of completing this work?
There are sometimes directories that people might decide to
Hmm.
join. There is one organization that's NEDA, so it's NEDA,
Hmm.
National End of Life Doula Alliance, I
Hmm.
believe.
Hmm.
And their goal, they are a number of trainers and other professionals in the field, like home funeral, green burial. And their goal is to create, they have sort of a stamp of approval. So they have an assessment that takes you through the core competencies
Hmm.
of doula
Yeah.
work. So it's an additional sort of stamp of approval if you're NEDA
Hmm. Yeah,
approved.
on
So
top
that's
of
an
our.
additional layer that you could consider. And they also offer webinars and a lot of great information
Great,
and a
thank you.
directory.
So as we said, and I do see a few more questions coming in, but it looks like Jacqueline's kind of jumping on those. Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for answering those. And thank you, everybody, for these wonderful questions today. We are just a few minutes away, going to try to wrap up here in a minute. As I said earlier slide, these are the dates, the important things that you want to keep in mind if you are looking to join our January program. I did also want to share that we are also launching a new program that will start late spring, it could be March, somewhere in there, that is actually a complementary program to our end of life doula care program that focuses on companion animals. I love my pets. We love our fur babies. We often call them, our animals. And so how can you support um, pet owners, children, family members, as that inevitable process happens as
Mhm.
well? And so I think it's such a really wonderful kind of add-on and complementary skill set to be thinking about because it's different
Mhm.
than humans. You can't
Right.
ask the animal and the dog, and so it's a really different set, I think, of
Mhm.
skills building on what you've learned in this
Mhm.
course. Will you just let us know a little bit more about what's coming up here?
Sure. So this will be a 4-week program, and the first 2 weeks will focus on doula essentials. So a bit of a review from the foundational course, yet with a new lens into pet end of life. And then the last 2 weeks will be about pet hospice, pet palliative care. What do those services entail?
Hmm.
And also the anticipatory grief, the decision making process,
Yeah,
which, as you mentioned, can feel really burdensome for humans of
yeah,
pets,
yeah.
and children's grief, and then memorializing how to support that time that you do have left with your pet so that it feels meaningful and
Hmm.
special, and honoring your pet after. And then what are the options for disposition, burial
Yeah.
after the pet dies?
Again, we don't have these kind of conversations until
Mhm.
sometimes it's in a crisis state or
Mhm.
a diagnosis. And so, very similar skill set, I think, that we're offering folks here to add on with pets. Looks like we have another question. Melissa's asking a couple questions. she's asking how Buddhism or spirituality will be included in the teaching of the content so she can make an informed decision. Oh, she has another
I'll
question.
hit that one first though
Yeah,
while
go
you
for
look.
that, and then I'll see if I can find Melissa
So I
your
did
question. Oh, there we
mention
go.
Buddhism when I
Yeah.
talked about beginner's mind. Also, turning towards suffering is a Buddhist practice. What we cover are the non-religious sort of approaches that we borrow from Buddhism. So it's and also we cover a number of cultures. So and practices and religions throughout the course as well. So we do, and you'll see if you're reading the Doula Heart book that I wrote, the guidebook also includes that curiosity, the beginner's mind, which is so key in this work, and the turning towards suffering. So those are the nods toward Buddhism. And then throughout, we're just looking at different cultures and practices. And the other book that we include is written by hospice nurses who allude to their religion, which is Christianity. And so we talk about that as well and include that in our discussion.
Great.
So
Hopefully,
we certainly don't have a
focus on Buddhism.
no.
Yeah.
And in our stance, our foundation is non-religious. We're very secular.
Great, thank you. And I think that answered Melissa's question because she's a Christian pastor and she was just wondering if that may conflict with some of her beliefs. But it sounds like hopefully, Melissa, that has helped give a little bit more perspective on what Francesca meant by that. So looks like folks are really having a great conversation and sharing information with each other. So doula-like, and so it's wonderful. Really appreciate that. So we are going to, if there's any other questions, I just want to make note that we're just about to wrap up. So just keeping an eye, if there's any final questions, we absolutely, and Jacqueline, I might ask that you just pop up the email address into the chat box as well, because if there's something that we didn't answer today and you would like a follow-up question with Francesca or one of our team members, please do email us and let us know if there's something else that we can answer. We do have a lot of information on our website, which is learn.edu, uvm.edu. And so there's a lot of information there. And again, you want to make sure that you are on our email list, share the information with friends that you think this might be relevant for them, that they might be interested, because we will be opening up that registration very soon for the January start date. I think we're pretty good. Looks like everybody's kind of pausing. Oh, how do I add my list to register for the January course before registration actually opens? Jump onto the website. I believe that was Peg. And you can do, there's usually an request for information, an inquiry form, or you know what, send us an email. Please do send us an email at learn@uvm.edu and just indicate that, please add me to that, that list to make sure that you're notified when registration opens for January. Oh, this is an interesting. Mike asks, if we are in groups of 25, can I choose to be with my friends who are joining?
We generally don't encourage that. We encourage sort of how it shakes out, we land there. And we've had that happen where people come through the course with someone. You will be moving through the material at the same time and covering the same content. And yet, what I've told people who end up in different sections is you're actually getting more eyes, more perspectives that you can then share with one
each other.
another.
Yeah. That's a great response to that too. Hopefully that helps, Mike, as well. So I think we're going to sign off now. I see a few questions, but it looks like Jacqueline's taking care of those. Yes, thank you, Barbara. We really appreciate everyone's questions today. Thank you so much, Francesca.
Thank you.
I love the work that you do, and I'm so happy that we're able to be a part of that here at UVM, and that we have so many people that want to be a part of this as well. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Kelly and Jacqueline and Foster and Eric, for running everything so smoothly for us today. And hopefully we'll see all of you in January's session of the End of Life Doula, and also consider the companion animal End of Life Doula care. Have a great afternoon.